Good morning again. Our theme for March, you are rooted in the divine. We've really been tackling some big topics. We started off at the beginning of the month talking about your personal self, all of those things that make you uniquely who you are, and the mystery of how that all comes from the same building blocks of divinity. And then the next week we talked about your impersonal stuff, all of that about you that you had no choice in. It comes from something that always was and always is and continues to be present in you. And today we're going even deeper, asking the question, what is God's will? Oh, that's big. It's a big question. And your big questions require big answers, which can be a problem if you have a very short span of attention. If you want a quick, easy answer right now before I go on to something else, it's hard to tackle the big things in life like that. I was remembering that in 2016, Timothy Egan in the New York Times wrote this article in which he said, "In the information blur of last year, you may have overlooked the news of our incredibly shrinking attention span." A survey of a certain nation's media consumption by Microsoft concluded that the average attention span had fallen to 8 seconds. And that's down from 12 seconds in the year 2000. He says, "We now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish." Now, I mention that because there isn't a quick, easy answer to the question, what is God's will? It depends on a lot of things. The answer depends on, what are you talking about when you use the word God? On Wednesday Night Wisdom, that's our free 1-hour class on science of mind, and everyone is welcome to attend. And the very first class I gave an assignment, a voluntary assignment for all of the people there. And the first assignment was to take a sheet of paper and write across the top, God, what it is to me. And then to start explaining it to yourself. Or even better, imagine that you are writing an article for the Press Democrat. God. Now that might take more than 8 seconds of your attention. And then when you're done, I wonder how many readers will agree with you. All of them. I doubt it. You and I can't possibly please everyone with just one definition of God. And still, we must get right with our own soul and with our own understanding of what God is to the best of our current ability. And our current ability to understand God has to grow and expand and develop all of the time. After all, how can that which is infinite be confined to one page? Or to one single sermon? Or to one person's opinion? Or to one religion only? So understanding the will of God is very much about understanding God's nature. And for that, I have to pay attention to everything. Not just what caught my attention for a few seconds, not just what's going on in my world right now, just everything, not just what's in front, just everything. In the self-mastery class, which I'm teaching on Monday, one of the students reminded us of that beautiful story from India about the blind. It's very well known. The blind men who are gathering around an elephant, and each is experiencing the elephant from a different angle, and so they come up with different conclusions. I didn't know that an American poet, John Godfrey Saxe, had put it to rhyming verse. So bear with me because I just find it charming. You'll recognize it. It's called The Blind Men and the Elephant, a Hindu tale. It was 6 men of Industan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here so very round and smooth and sharp?" To me it's mighty clear. The wonder of an elephant is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out his eager hand and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain," quoth he. "It is clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "Even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can? This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope than, seizing the swinging tail that felt within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Industan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong. Though each was partly in the right, all were in the wrong. So oft it is in theological wars that disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. Isn't that too cute? And I like the parable because it points out that we experience the divine from our limited perspective and experience. Whatever it is we want to call the divine, whether, we call it the thing itself, some people call it God. Some people, preferring not to use the word God, call it the higher power or reality or life itself. And the important question, though, for me is, why would a person like you and me, why would we want to get clearer and clearer on what God is? And I think the answer is because the will of God must be consistent with God's nature. Now, if I think the elephant is very like a tree, I could make some wrong conclusions about how to relate to that elephant. If I think the elephant is very like a spear, or I think anything from a limited perspective, I could run into some trouble when it comes time to figure out what is the will of the elephant. I'll be missing some important information. I might start expecting something from the elephant that is being influenced by limited perspective of what it really is. Kevin and I have this code phrase, this short code phrase that we use when we are expecting something from someone, and what we're expecting is out of character for that person. Have you ever done that? And the phrase comes from an idea that is often attributed to Einstein. I'm not sure that he actually said it, but it's something like this. You can't really judge a fish based on its ability to climb a tree. So with Kevin, when one of us is getting into unreasonable expectations, the other one says quietly, "Fish tree." Oh, that's a good one. That's really a good one. When I expect something from someone and what I expect is not part of their nature, well, it leads to confusion and disappointment. It really does. So I'm keeping in mind the will of God must be consistent with God's nature. So when terrible things happen in the world, if someone says, "It's the will of God," I say quietly to myself, "Fish tree." And I say to myself, the will of God must be consistent with God's nature. So when terrible things happen in the world, I do what Mr. Rogers suggests. I look for the helpers, and I call that the will of God. Like right now, the people who are helping to rebuild the North Bay, I call that the will of God. Like the people who we don't even know, who sent almost $100,000 to us to help the victims of the fire. I call that the will of God. And then I try to align my will with that will. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, in the beautiful book, The Science of Mind, on page 264 wrote, "True prayer must be, 'Thy will be done.' But the implication relative to the will of God in this prayer is not a submission to the inevitability of evil or limitation. No. It is a knowledge that the will of God is always good." In other words, when I read that, I see I don't accept catastrophe as the whole picture. I might just be holding on to the tail end. I might just be dealing with an ear. Now I look for the good, and I align with it, and I follow it, and I let it set for me the direction for my life. The will of God must be consistent with God's nature. While we're sharing well-known stories and fables, there is another one from the Zen tradition, very well-known, and there are many, many forms of it out there. Here's one that I hadn't read before. I'm sure you will recognize it. Two monks were washing their bowls in the river when they noticed a scorpion that was drowning. One monk immediately scooped it up and set it upon the bank, and in the process he was stung. He went back to washing his bowl, and again the scorpion fell in. The monk saved the scorpion again, and again he was stung. The other monk asked him, "Friend, why do you continue to save the scorpion when you know its nature is to sting?" "Because," the monk replied, "to save it is my nature." Oh. The will of God must be consistent with its nature, which is why I want to continue to explore what is the nature of the divine to the best of my ability, to keep on pushing back the walls of my understanding, getting as much help as I can to grow and expand, and understanding the nature of God, understand the will of creation. Ralph Waldo Emerson's very helpful in this regard. I believe he wrote this: "Love is our highest word and synonym for God. God is love. The will of God must be consistent with love." Well, Not just any old, ordinary kind of love. Eternal love. Unconditional love. Life-affirming love. Maybe I could personalize that and say to myself, when I am living from unconditional, life-affirming love, that's when I am in sync with, in line with the will of God. Or maybe I could look at it like this. I have my will that comes from myself, my small self. Simultaneously in me there is also my will that comes from my uppercase S self, my higher self. They're both going on simultaneously. And the will of my small self, well, it is influenced by conditions of my experience of life up until now. So sometimes that includes the unhealed parts of my life. Sometimes it has an agenda. Sometimes it's motivated by old habits and patterns, and sometimes it's a little unconscious. Sometimes it's got very strong ideas of how things should be. And sometimes it rejects the way things actually are and insists on something different. And now the will of my higher self is not influenced by any of that. Oh, when I make choices influenced by my limited view of the elephant, or based on my unreasonable expectations of a fish, and in that moment I'm drawing upon my small self, it tends to lead to tension and disappointment. So I'm learning to make choices based on my higher self. And I'm learning to align with my best understanding of what divinity is, even though that's growing all the time. You know, one of my colleagues said the good news is that there are spaces between the will of my small self and the will of my higher self. Spaces of knowing. You know, those spaces where I am not driven by my reaction. I'm not driven by my personality. So I get it. My practice is to find and rest in those spaces. Let my reactive nature settle down so that my truest, most authentic self can emerge, because I suspect that is where I'll find the will of God in me. And it will always be consistent with God's nature. So here is my current view of the elephant called the will of God. From where I'm standing at this moment, this is what I think I know. And it might be different from what you see and know. But I think this is what I know. That the will of God is that within us which gives itself wholeheartedly and wordlessly to the present moment. It's not something out there with a secret hidden agenda. It's the good that is in all that is. It's the highest vibration of the authentic truth. It is life, and it's never against life. It's the power that animates us, energizes us, lifts us up, and directs us when we harmonize with it. So when I read the phrase, "Thy will be done," I think what that means to me is this. May the deepest, most authentic will which resides in the heart of me, and which is the nature of the divine, may that will be done through me. I invite you to breathe in with me. And to exhale, let your eyes close if you feel comfortable doing so we can join in a moment of prayer. There is one power, one creation, one creator, one infinite presence, one mind. I use all these words and I realize none of them are adequate to describe that which is infinite and immortal and everywhere present. And yet I use the words to point to all of that which is the thing itself. I do so that I may expand my own understanding of who I am and what I am and feel my oneness with all of that eternity, all of that immortality, all of that infinite wisdom, and to understand that that is in me and I am in it, that my nature is one with its nature. I speak these words of prayer so that I may realize that there is that within me which knows. Because it is in its original state of perfection and oneness, it has always been. And no matter what the landscape that I travel through, no matter what the circumstances I am called to deal with, no matter what happens and doesn't happen, that within me stays in its original state. And as I sync myself to that, I harmonize myself to that, to its nature within me, it guides me to choose and act and speak in a way that reveals the kingdom of heaven on earth. And I know that when seen rightly through the eyes of unity, the world appears back to me in its true form. And I see through everything to the truth of our connection, to the existence of possibility, to the availability of solution, to the love that is present in everything. And so I commit myself to nurture my own understanding of divinity so that I may live in harmony with its will in me. This fills me up with gratitude. And I remember to hold this prayer lightly. That's why I say I release this word to spiritual law, to that aspect of creation that listens to the prayers we pray and acts upon it. I like to remind myself, no effort involved in this. Just a coming home to the truth. Which is why I close the prayer by saying, and so it is. I invite you to breathe in and to sigh.